Well, hi, everybody. Steve Tarter, another edition of Tarter Source. And with me today, Chris Farris, Reference Assistant Librarian at the Peoria Public Library. You've been there since 2001.
Correct.
Just down the street here. We're in downtown Peoria, of course. And tell people what you do, Chris, because I got a feeling a lot of us have worked with you, know you, probably talked to you, but give us the picture of not necessarily everything you do, but what do you do at the library?
Well, I spend most of my time in the basement of the library, lower level one, in the local history genealogy room. Now, on occasion, I'll spend time upstairs at a reference
I've
desk.
seen you up there.
Okay, so I do that. I fill in at branches. I worked at a branch, but these days I spend most of my time in the basement, in the room that you've seen me in when you often visit.
And let me stop you right there. What is genealogy? Wait, there's a little quiz we have to work with Chris on.
What is genealogy?
Yeah, because I'm thinking people think, yeah, genealogy. What is that again?
Well, people are studying their families or maybe somebody else's family, and we have information in our building, and then we have database that we subscribe to. We subscribe to Ancestry. They can use that. We have biographical files, and we have newspapers that might have a clipping of somebody's obituary. We have records of death and maybe a few marriage and birth things of that nature.
I think people, and I'd say people, everyone's different, but you think of the library and everyone has their own association with it. But of course, books and many other materials. But I don't think they're fully aware. Some folks, anyway, aren't as aware of the depository of information that you can get your fingers on, because you were talking earlier about data files and things that. If somebody said, and we've talked to this when I worked on the paper, Block and Cool department store. You've got quite a storehouse of info on that.
Well, we have a file on that business, and then we would have some files on the people who were associated with it, the various families that were involved, or maybe some employees.
In fact, I remember somebody called the paper. They had something, I don't know what they had. It was something regarding the Block and Cool, or the family of either Block or Cool.
Oh, right.
And I knew right where to turn. I put them on to you because you have that sort of overview of materials, and you've provided it to the newspaper in the past and probably others. You're doing research now. The research we're going to talk about today, what brought that on? We're talking about the mass production of penicillin in Peoria at, of course, the Ag Lab.
Well, it wasn't so much that topic as it was that sometimes I collaborate with Peoria magazines and Jonathan Wright, I believe you know him.
Oh yeah, we know.
So Jonathan contacted me and said we have some space in this coming December issue. Which
now, you write regularly for them, don't you?
Semi-regularly, yes.
Semi-regularly.
And it's usually, obviously, connected to my work at the library, which has something to do with Peoria's history.
Right.
And in this case, it's Women of Influence, and he was asking for something from a woman of influence from the past. And the first person, and a lot of people would probably think, oh, well, like, Lydia Bradley or Betty Friedan or somebody like that. And they've been covered a lot.
Right.
So there's somebody who is not covered as much, although a lot of people have heard of her, but not necessarily by her given name, and that's Moldy Mary.
Moldy Mary. That's nice to be able to remember it that way. And give us who is Moldy Mary for those people out there that say, "Yeah, I heard of that." Well, who is she again?
Well, legend has it that Moldy Mary was a young woman who worked for the Ag Lab, the National Center for Agricultural Research, I believe it was called at the time, in the 1940s when it first got started, and that she was tasked with going to various markets and places like that to in Peoria to look for food items that would have mold growing on. They're looking for a certain kind of mold that had the penicillin on it. I'm not scientific, so I'm going to describe this incorrectly if any of the guys from the lab are watching. But that's my basic understanding. That's why I said this isn't necessarily research that I did on the development of penicillin, although I read a lot about it and finding about Moldy Mary, who I believe was Mary Hunt, and then she became Mary Stephen after she got married.
And she worked at the Ag Lab, and she was out there just doing a little, I guess you could say, research.
What's near as I can tell, she worked there for about a year in 1943.
Okay.
And then where she had come before and where she moved after, I did a little research on that too. So I spent several hours researching this topic because I wanted to present the most factual information I can.
And when will this appear in print?
It will hit the stands, I understand, or mailboxes tomorrow.
Oh, well, this is timely.
Right.
All right, good, good. So Moldy Mary is Mary Hunt, right?
And that wasn't even her name she was born with. It appears that it was changed from the research I did, and I was able to pull up what I believe was her immigration records through using Ancestry.
And the story goes, and again, it is a story, so maybe, you know, the who knows what the real thing is. But it was a melon that she got that had the...
Cantaloupe.
A cantaloupe, okay.
Yes.
That had this mold that was used at the ag lab.
And it has a scientific name, and I can't pronounce it.
Well, good. I mean, we don't have to worry about it.
It's a Latin name, but in essence what it is it's a variety of penicillin.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. You know, of course, in that era, in the 40s, war year particularly, you didn't have I imagine there was a supermarket in town because Piggly Wiggly, I know, had come to Peoria. Kroger might have been here.
Many supermarkets or more so grocery stores.
Yeah, smaller
than
little stores that it might have had produce out there, maybe had it out there a while, a little old, some of it. You know, you had to check that thing out and could have found it. Yeah.
And I'd never heard of where it was. I just, again, the legend says she found it at some supermarket, some grocery store in Peoria. But through my research, I believe I found what the market was.
What was that?
So it was it was here on Main Street, where down the block here, where the Marriott is now.
Oh,
and
okay. Right downtown.
Yes, it would have been. It was one of the older buildings in town. It had been a grocery store for a while, but if my memory serves me correctly, it was Illinois Valley Fruit and Produce, or something to that. I don't have any notes in front of me.
I could just see the ad campaign. We produced the melon that had the mold that saved World War II soldiers.
In fact, a lot of there was a painting made of this, of her finding it.
And I believe it's a mural right now.
It is, on the Gabbard building.
Yeah, in the warehouse district, you go down there and you can find it. And incidentally, totally off the subject, but murals are fascinating because we see so many now in Peoria, thankfully. Doug and Eileen Lunig have played a big role in that. But the I'm over there down at 315 Main Street, which is now the new home of Peoria Made. The Peoria Innovation Alliance has a building. Used to be the cupcake place.
Correct.
And you go through that building, and I don't know if you can always do this, but you go into their little parking lot in the back where people park, and there's a mural on the wall. You know, the public wouldn't see it unless you're in this area, and it's Burt Reynolds sitting in a car like Smokey and the Bandit or something, waving.
Really?
So I just tell that to people. There are some murals you're not even seeing, but the Moldy Mary one certainly is out there for all the public to see. And that was a painting, wasn't it? But it was they're using the illustration that.
So it was my understanding from my research. It was a painting, and it's unclear who commissioned it exactly. Mm-hmm. It was then used in an advertisement that was for penicillin, as you said.
Right.
And I think that the tagline is from a moldy melon in Peoria, Illinois, or something along those lines. So then you're right. It became, as I mentioned earlier, a legend. Some people think it's only a legend.
Right.
And that's why I started researching this, because I'm going to tell the story. I want to make sure I don't perpetuate something that's not true.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of the library, where you have sources and you take the time. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of research effort going on in all our media anymore. But that's the beauty of the library and doing that. So what will be? They came to you and said, "Okay, we're doing women of influence, or in the area women of influence." What other? You've done other subjects. You've done, I think, was it one of the theaters? I saw your story on was not the Opera House, but one of the buildings not here anymore.
The Orpheum?
Orpheum. You did a
Yes.
story on that. What other stories have you done for the Peoria Magazine?
Well, I most recently wrote something on dining in downtown.
Oh yeah, I saw that. That was a good one. Yeah, that's a great subject because to me, well, first of all, everyone, we all, what is it? Channel 25. You see, you got to eat. So we're all in that boat. But people who've been in this area for a while can tell you, oh, I remember, Banakans out there at Junction City or this and that, and Pete Pasquale up there near the warehouse district has a building filled with old relics.
Including a shellacked hot dog.
A shellacked, yeah, there's
From
the Hunters.
Hunters.
Yes, Hunters, the last hot dog, 62 or something. That's right, the shellacked hot dog. How could we forget that? Was that in your article?
No, actually, there's so much. I found there's so much to cover that I try to focus on a few places and things that places that people hadn't necessarily heard of.
Right. And that's, to me, that is a gold mine because I think it's of common interest. People love reading it. Even if you're young and you haven't spent a lot of time in Peoria, they used to have a Pig and Whistle or, whatever the name of their place was, and used to be a chili shop down here or something. I mean, I think people respond well to that. I wish they could have something like that again now or something along those lines, because obviously in that era, you didn't have all the franchises. You had some, but you don't have what you have now.
And then there are franchises that I think people didn't realize were franchises are not national corporations. They thought maybe they're local, or
Right.
at least I'm speaking for myself. But if you talk to people about Lums, a lot of people don't realize
Right.
it was a national company.
Right. Although didn't Dave and Ernie split that off and have their own
They
division?
did eventually because
Eventually, yeah.
Lums became defunct, and they bought essentially the rights to my understanding is the use of the recipes and the name.
I remember the gourmet burger from Lums. I don't remember particularly what it was. A burger with, I think, mushrooms and things on it. But their big thing, Lums' big thing was hot dogs cooked in beer.
So
Yeah.
I was going to just say something about that because I watched The Irishman this weekend.
Oh, yeah, the movie, Scorsese. Yeah.
And I've never seen Lums portrayed in a movie, but it was in that movie because one of the characters in the movie loved the Lums hot dog because of the way it was made, and they showed an outside of a Lums.
Oh, very good. Well, now I want to see that movie. Knives Out is the one I just saw, sort of an old-time murder mystery. Give that one a thumbs up. But I do want to see the gangster movie with De Niro and everybody. We'll have to look for that. See, those are the little things that you could plug in that I think would be great on I don't know if it was a website or something, but talking about food, because there's a history side to it. There's nowadays, my goodness, every time you turn around, somebody's talking about delivering food or, getting it into your house versus, whether it's a supermarket or a restaurant. Everyone wants to bring it to you now. I don't know where that's coming from because to me it didn't seem all that hard to go out and get it, but hey, that's just me. Maybe there's a time for delivery, but we'll see.
Speaking of food, and I don't think I've told Jonathan this yet, Jonathan Wright with Peoria Magazines.
Right.
But one of the upcoming articles, if he has space for me, one of the upcoming issues is I want to talk about food and the Peoria crime underworld.
Oh.
Because there is a connection.
Oh, really?
Yes.
You would do that one?
That's what I like to do because it was this article I wrote that I mentioned earlier. It got so large that I had to cut a lot out. And there's some research I did on a couple of, they would go by various names, I guess cafes or taverns, but
Right.
they serve food and alcohol, but they also serve gambling forms.
Oh.
And one of the largest lotteries or baseball pools, they called it at the time, was out of one of these.
Oh, very good. Well, this is what I'm saying. People don't realize the expanse of information that flows through. Well, it flows through the community, but one of the depositories is at the library, and I think people are not always aware of that. They can come see you down there, and talk about that. What is the biggest request you get? Is it for family information? And when you're down there in the genealogy section, are people coming in and saying, I want to look up my, or what, do they have specific interests? What do you hear the most when you're down there?
It's so varied that there's not any one thing I can point to. Many people are looking for photographs of various things. It could be of an ancestor, it could be of their house or the house they bought that is an older house.
Back when?
Correct. So we have a large photograph collection, thousands of photographs, and I think maybe you might have seen some of them on my local history collection page that I...
You sent me a number of them. Well, of course, Chris and I first got to know each other through doing things, stories that you were kind enough to share information, because at the paper, we're often, we have our own, or the Journal Star has its own collection, but it isn't always complete, and the library is often more varied. But I think the north side, the North Valley, you had lots of pictures of homes in that area back when, and really it's eye-opening, because you realize, and people who drive through the North Valley now, it's an area that I think is coming back. They're working hard. Habitat for Humanity and others are really digging their heels in and making that work. But what it was really a very interesting neighborhood. Maybe not as upscale as Moss Avenue, but in many ways it had some of those
there
parts.
were some mansions there, and
mansions,
very wealthy people who lived there, and they lived right alongside working class people or middle class people. So it was I'd say a mixed demographic neighborhood.
And people don't realize that sometimes, because sometimes we've lost those larger, or they've been cut up into apartments or whatever it is. But that's the beauty of having that look back.
And the way we do things like that, just for people who don't know, is that we can look at census records and look, say, who in 1900 lived at a certain address and who their neighbors were, and sometimes census records include the value of the house or how much somebody made or their occupation. And we have that through our Ancestry subscription. We also have city directories, which I'm sure you've used before.
Yeah, I think there's a city directory at the Journal Star. I think it's 2008.
Okay.
So it's still...
That's the only one that they have?
That's the last one they ordered in,
okay.
yeah. So unfortunately, it's a little dated. But yeah, I love looking back at the old ones, because sometimes I did when you wanted to find out a business address, or just find out more about an area of town, that you can find out with a city directory. But unfortunately, I think all that stuff's moved over to the website now, and
we still have city directories, physical copies, and then we microfilm them.
Do you?
Yes.
You have the latest city directory?
We do.
Oh.
And
See?
going back to the 1850s.
Wow. 1850s. Now that would have been a different Peoria. Of course, you still had probably the distilleries were probably on the rise then, so you would have had some of that. We're talking with Chris Farris here at the Peoria Public Library. He works in the genealogy section, does all this
And
great
local history.
And what?
And local
and
history.
local history, because I like to call you an archivist, because you find all these things, pictures and information and records, and it's there for the public. You're there to help people. People can just come in there and talk to you. That's really a great resource and a great public service.
And it's more important to know where the things are necessarily than to know what's in them too.
Right, know where to go to find it. Well, that's kind of like a reporter's thing. I mean, I would tell people, when I started at the paper 20-some years ago, they had me doing farm reports. I said, well, I was about as qualified to do agriculture as I am to do brain surgery, because I grew up in Boston and never was on a farm. But you need to know where to go to talk to the farmers, people that Farm Bureau, those folks that are in the know. If you know where to go, they can inform you, and then you can pass it on to the public.
And then you learned a lot by doing that.
And then I learned enough to at least write a halfway cogent story, which I'll leave to the readers to decide whether that worked or not.
And so that's what I do. A lot of times I don't know anything about a subject. When somebody asks, they assume that, well, you must know everything in here, and I don't, but I'm learning right along with you as I help you do the research.
Well, Chris, you'll have to come back and tell us about your next project. I definitely want to get into the food thing, but we'll look for Moldy Mary in the Peoria Magazine.
Correct.
Hitting your newsstands now. I don't know if there are any newsstands out there, but your mailbox or whatever.
It is around at various businesses for sure, and there's a list on their website.
Good, and I know it's probably well, a lot of people get the magazine, so we'll get that, and we'll have to get Jonathan in here too, because we can talk more about things that are coming up and great history. Well, thank you so much.
No problem.
Chris Farris from the library, and we'll see you next time on Tarter Sauce.
PeoriaLife.com